Amazing additions on the field for the 2023 class for Miami, but even more so, the college football landscape continues to shake. Where's Miami headed, and how valuable is the program? We delve into that over the next 60 minutes here at the Voice of College Football, the U. And we got a special guest on the line from, of course, a number of our shows, and he's throwing up the U. So you got to respect that, folks. Tony Altimore joining us as he has on a number of occasions here. Consultant, strategist for a number of corporations, nonprofit institutions. Tony, before we get started here, you've already joined us on a number of shows, but let our Miami contingent know a little bit about your background before we dive into Miami status in college football.
Sure, Mark. I typically do and nonprofit clients, but I also have a background in athletics. I actually worked at USC Athletics for a while living in LA. I competed as an athlete in the Ivy League in grad school, in cycling, because you have grad students because it's not NCAA. Worked with their athletic department there. And I've worked with over 250 colleges and universities through a nonprofit leadership program that I help teach every year. So I get to see universities all around and work with students on their campuses all the time. And then one of the things that I've been trying to do lately, especially, is trying to help bridge kind of the strategy gap that I see that a lot of our sports fans, our sports media, who are awesome, but sort of micro focused on football, don't always get the big picture issue of what universities and university executives are seeing and thinking. And so therefore, a lot of stuff seems to come as a big surprise to them. And so hopefully today we can talk about some stuff and look at some numbers the way that university executives and presidents are.
So we've been taking Tony through the Voice of College Football car wash, as it were, through our various shows in regards to educating myself and everybody else on regards to, with all this realignment and expansion that is already transpired, and then what the projections are toward the future, how valuable these various institutions are from a football and from an academic and financial and television media standpoint. And it's really been just fascinating to delve into these numbers. So Tony, of course, we're going to look specifically at Miami, and a lot of talk out there about possibly Miami, Clemson, Florida State joining the SEC, or does the Big Ten swoop down and grab Miami and the others? So let's look at Miami, and basically, as you look at this institution, there just seems to be so many positives from all aspects when looking at the Miami football program.
There really are. First, to your Miami fans, I want to thank them. Do you want to put up the slides real quick? Or do
yes, do you want?
Okay. Just to thank you guys. So this is just to give myself a little bit of Miami street cred. This is 13-year-old me at Miami spring practice with Denny Erickson. That hat, by the way, as a kid growing up in Michigan, was like the coolest hat you could possibly have. And I wore it to Jurassic Park for my first like legit movie date at like age 13. So people of Miami, go Canes, the U. I am old school fans. My dad actually is a football coach who helped would work with your coaches, and they'd sort of scheme offenses together in spring practice. So it was a lot of fun. Anyway, I've long been a Miami fan, but we'll get on to the fun part. I went to USC, by the way, just for full disclosure. Miami's in kind of an interesting standpoint. We can talk a little bit more about history in a little bit. Miami was sort of part of where this happened the last time. Miami's also a really interesting school. It's one of a very, very select few schools that is in this top 50, technically top 100 because it also includes liberal arts, but top 100 schools and top 50 football programs based on the CFN 5-year program study that they did a couple years ago. It was a phenomenal piece of analysis. And there's only 12 schools that are in that top 100 or top 50, technically, depending on how you measure it, schools and the top 50 football programs. And Miami's one of them. And the ACC has 3 of the 12, with Notre Dame, who is part of the ACC, sort of de facto, but part of the ACC in all other sports, Georgia Tech, and Miami. The Big Ten, and I've used this slide before, but Mark, this is the first time the slide has actually been adjusted now to take the Big Ten to 5 and the Pac-12 down to 1. So we had a little bit of changes. Another thing about Miami, a lot of people don't understand. You guys understand this as Miami fans. For anybody who's not from Miami, Miami is an awesome, small, elite private school in Coral Gables, just outside Miami. Very similar to Northwestern, USC, Duke, SMU. That realm of small private schools that have a big punch when they play football. This is sort of looking at. I did a top 40. Put this on Twitter. By the way, if any of you guys want these slides, they're on my Twitter at TJ Altimore. TJ Altimore is like Baltimore with no B. I think it's on the screen. You can download the slides real quick and follow along with us for those interested. A lot of people have asked for that. Looking at just the A5 or the Power 5, technically the A5 conferences, I did a top 40 of the academic schools. So that's the thing that's really, football and money is what sort of drives the networks, but associations academically are what drive university presidents in a big way. And what's a lot of people don't realize is Miami is in that ultra elite tier. You guys are actually tied for 19 in terms of top academic institutions that play Power 5 football. So you guys are in the ultra elite zone, which makes you really highly desirable. One thing Miami does not have is the AAU status that you hear a lot about. And that is mostly because, you guys are a great school. It's mostly because you don't do as much graduate research. So there's a very, very few select schools, Wake Forest, Notre Dame, Miami, a couple others. Dartmouth used to be in this category until about 2 years ago, that are very elite academic institutions that just graduate research isn't one of their biggest things. You guys are world-class in marine biology and a bunch of other things, but you don't do as much of that graduate research. And so as a result, you're not in the AAU, but you're sort of in that weird gray area of schools that are in that, batting in that area, that part of the batting order, but not actually AAU members. So looking at you guys, we've done this in a couple of shows, looking at these heat maps that break down conferences and people in them on 3 different metrics. And when you hear about how the Big 12 evaluates schools, how the Big 10 evaluates schools, how the Pac-12 evaluates schools, they all kind of do variations on the same. They look at really sort of 3 categories. They mix it up a little bit, but the first one is they will look, and the most important one, quite frankly, is they look at the institution, academics, and resources. So, what kind of institution is this? Who's the university? How do we want to play with them? Then they look at the market, and then they look at athletics and football. And what they typically what they're doing is they're qualifying an institution to say, all right, is this a school that we are interested in having in our conference? And if the answer is yes, it's like you hear salespeople talk all the time about like qualifying a buyer. They're qualifying, like, is this somebody we're interested in having in our conference? And if the answer is yes, then the next question starts to look at the TV numbers and all that kind of stuff. They are not going to add somebody into the conference that they don't think is worthy, and they're not going to add somebody in unless they're really desperate. Pac-12 is sort of in that realm a little bit right now, but they're not going to add somebody in the conference, especially if they don't trust that institution with their own students. Because a conference, you have a vote. Everybody's got an equal vote. And those presidents are looking at those other presidents and those other ADs, and they're looking at those institutions and really saying, like, are we prepared to trust you with a vote that affects our students? And this is a very interesting thing for the Pac-12, because they have traditionally been, Pac-12 and the Ivy League kind of are these two, like, a little bit more ivory tower organizations, and the Big Ten to a little bit lesser extent, that very much view important standards like of who they want to associate with. And to university administrators, this is a big deal. Like, who are you associating with? Because this has to do with impacts your donors, impacts your faculty recruitment, impacts your marketing, your branding, and your image. Not your branding like, oh, I want to sell some sweatshirts, but your branding of attracting regular students, which is your most important thing, attracting employers who are going to hire your students, and attracting the donors who are going to pay for your whole school. So Miami is in an interesting category. And one of the reasons that Miami has a lot of value that people don't always appreciate is that Miami is a world-class school. Now, you take a look here, you guys in the ACC, And this, again, there's no like exact where you fit in. These are just kind of rough things. And these green is the best in the conference. Red is the worst in the conference. There is no, I'll tell you, and Mark and I've talked about this before, there are no crappy schools in the Power 5 conferences. Seriously, even the worst of the lowest rated, which is Mississippi State, is an outstanding global institution. So every school in the Power 5 conferences is a great quality school. But you take a look here, it really compares it against each other. Look how much green there is for Miami. Because you guys have a lot of value. Just people can see you guys are a top program. Take a look at you within the SEC. Miami relative to the rest of the SEC itself. I mean, you guys are also a very, very highly rated program. I mean, an institution. The rest of your sports aren't quite as strong. Now take a look at even Miami in the Big Ten. You guys are right in the middle of the pack. You get you sort of don't do as well in terms of your Olympic sports, but you're right in the middle of the pack. You guys, for example, now take a look at USC, UCLA, and Notre Dame. Some people are a little surprised. They're on the edge of the Big Ten, which is pretty awesome. But you guys, Miami really could fit in anywhere. And you have another advantage that doesn't get counted as much, I think, which is that people want to go to Miami. And that it's not that matters for fans and camper vans and all that kind of stuff, but it matters a lot for donors and big dollar people that want to go to those games, because those games are where people network. I mean, you guys, I don't know if you know this or not at Miami games, but your donors are all coming to your football games. It's where they mingle with each other. They get to hang out with your famous alumni and your fans and stuff like that. USC does exactly the same thing. USC and Miami are famous for this. Those games are the place to be, especially when you guys are winning. And I think you guys have another advantage that makes you incredibly valuable. Your president, supposedly, the word on the street, and you heard it in the media, was that Miami, post the Nevin Shapiro scandal, was very much sort of backed away from football. And your president took a lot of flack for that. A lot of flack, president almost getting fired, probably flack, and changed his tune and replaced your in what was that, Mark? 5 days they replaced the athletic director and the coach.
Yeah.
Without, I don't think you even fired the first two before you hired the replacements. It was kind of dickish, kind of baller, a little bit of both, but impressive. But it showed Miami exactly the same thing USC did it within 2 weeks. But it showed that Miami was committed to succeeding in football. And I think that gives Miami an incredible value to any conference. People know that Miami is here, Miami's going to play, and Miami's going to do great. They also, your president, they trust to make votes about their school. They like Miami.
Tony, question about the enrollment size. I just ran some numbers looking at Miami, Clemson, and Florida State.
I think this is a couple years old, actually. I think Miami's now 14,000 undergrads, aren't you?
Okay. So is that any kind of a factor in all of this, do you think, in comparing these universities, the enrollment size?
It's a thing, I think, to help understand. Enrollment size helps build alumni, which helps build donors, which helps build fans, all that kind of stuff. A big enrollment also means you probably have a lot of graduate students. A lot of graduate students are doing a lot of graduate research. One of the things that university presidents are always looking for is they want to have schools that are like them. Actually, let me put a caveat on that. They want to have schools that are like them, or schools that are like what they want to be, like who they aspire to be. For example, Stanford. Everybody wants to be Stanford. And even though you're not Stanford, you kind of want to be Stanford, so you have them with you. Utah, when Utah got into the Pac-12, they talk a lot about how that just boosted everything for the school, and very much a rising tide floats all boats. So faculty recruitment got better, student recruitment got better, their media attention got better, they got all the free marketing, everything got better in the university. Donations went up, and they got into the AAU. As a result of that, it's just almost like kids in high school or whatever. You are who you hang out with, and so they want to make sure that when they're adding schools, that they're adding somebody that they want to hang out with. Now, the caveat to that, of course, is, does the math work on the TV network's end? And sometimes if you're like the Pac-12 right now this week, you're in a little bit of a desperate circumstance, and you're trying to make that, you got to find a way to make that math work. And maybe you have to like cut a little bit of corners here and there. But in general, they are institutions that are looking to say, is this somebody that we want to be with? And that's a big thing. Like, is this somebody we want to have in the club? Is this somebody we want to reflect our school? And Miami, and so that's where, again, we talk about the AAU-ness, the research, like all that kind of stuff. Now in the Big Ten, and we could go into this a little bit more later if you want, Mark. I don't know if these folks have already heard it, but the Big Ten very much integrates itself within its schools. So the Big Ten is integrating its libraries, it's integrating its purchasing, integrating like how they help hire their professors, how they train, they do all the leadership training for their faculty, their cybersecurity, their tech development, all that kind of stuff is integrated in the Big Ten. And so in the Big Ten, when they're looking to bring you on, it's very much like, do we want to fully integrate our school in with this place? It's also, by the way, why nobody leaves the Big Ten. In fact, the only school that ever quit the Big Ten was Chicago. They quit in 1946, and they actually have stayed in the academic component. They're still there. Because
so, Tony, when we take all the facets that we've discussed on other live streams concerning the decisions that are being made at very high levels, again, you look at the quality of the football program, the athletics department as a whole, you look at culture, you look at academics, you look at resources and money. Does Miami appear to be a better fit for the culture, the academics, the football, everything involved in the SEC or the Big Ten? How would you make that comparison?
So I think the big difference would be how many you want to add. Yeah. So, and that's the big issue. Like I think the thing about Miami is you want to say, like, does Miami qualify? Like would they be okay somewhere? In the SEC, it should be absolutely. Of course, you also have like sometimes some weird relationships going on. When sometimes you have rivals that supposedly do or don't want their rival in there. That tends to be more on like an athletic director or fan level. It's very rare that that's on an institutional and a presidential level. And I think, I mean, for example, when you heard Texas A&M and the Texas thing, like you heard that like, oh, we don't want Texas. You heard that from fans. You maybe heard that from some people in the athletic department. You didn't hear that from the senior executives. Right, like they're viewing as like the Texas A&M game is where we're going to have every billion-dollar donor in the world. They want that game. I mean, another example, USC Rutgers, right? People are like, oh my gosh, that's so terrible. No, that's not terrible. USC flies its business students out to New York for like meetings and parties and receptions like every year anyway. The USC week in DC that they do every year is a huge thing with all the senators and the congressmen and the government executives and all these people. And so as a result of that, like they want to be playing at Maryland. The grant of rights question. Sorry, Mario, I just saw you made a super chat. I'll give you the answer. So the word I heard as of like half hour ago in a great interview with Ross Dellinger, who's broken this down all kinds, and Andy Staples, who's broken this down, is that he thinks your grant of rights, they both think your grant of rights is pretty ironclad. I'm told your grant of rights is to anyone who's just watching, we're answering the super chat question. Your grant of rights is pretty ironclad, and I'm told it's a terribly written contract, like problematically terribly written, such as, so again, this is what I've been told, I haven't read it myself, but that it, for example, doesn't even include jurisdictions, like which courts and which states would have jurisdiction. It's something that would usually be like maybe a 50-page contract, and it's like a 4-page contract. Like it is very ironclad and probably really difficult to get out of unless the majority of the conference wants to get out of it. So you guys may be sort of stuck in that, but it also may help you, right? Because it may keep your conference together in a way that lets you just sort of dominate. I mean, one of the big things, you guys remember back when Miami was in the Big East, like the Big East was never perceived as like the best conference. That didn't matter because Miami will knock you around in the conference and they'll go knock you around in the non-conference. So to Miami fans, I think you guys should not be as worried about like, can we get in with the cool kids as like, can we just keep knocking people around? I think as long as you guys knock people around, you're going to be in the elite elements of football. And by the way, the ACC is a great conference to be in for all your other sports. It also is now, actually, I guess you're probably behind the Big Ten, the second most elite academic conference we have, behind the Big Ten and the Ivy League. So it's a good place to be.
We've got Tony Altimore on the line. Again, you can catch him on Twitter. There's his handle at TJ Altimore, and he's done a remarkable job. But he's been making the media run all over the internet and otherwise, and certainly joined us on a number of our shows to clarify a lot of what's going on in regards to what kind of conversations are being had in boardrooms concerning conference expansion, realignment, and for some of these conferences, survival, and what is important and what we may, as football fans, primarily blow out of proportion and put too much emphasis on because of our rooting interests versus what, again, what really matters.
To Eric, who just made the comment about Miami isn't a good enough school for the AAU, like I said, your graduate research isn't really there. That's why you're not in the AAU. But take a look. Here you are against a whole bunch of AAU schools, and you got better metrics than most of them. So, I mean, yeah, you're right. You're right, Eric. Your graduate research is not, you don't have as much of it, but you're certainly a better school than half the or third of the AAU probably. So I wouldn't say that you're not a good enough university. I just say you just don't have as much graduate research, which, by the way, neither does Notre Dame, neither does Wake Forest. And Notre Dame is the sixth most elite academic institution in the Power Five, right there. So just a thought. Miami doesn't always get enough credit.
Folks, we're here every Wednesday at 7 Eastern time, so please leave your comments and questions there in the live chat. We will get to them and pass them on to Tony.
Palomalo asking about, I don't think the Big Ten would take anybody. You know, you may well be right, but we are in right now a crazy time. And if they really want to be national, I mean, you guys are about as good as, I mean, you're a lot better school than Nebraska, and who was in the AAU and then got kicked out. But it's certainly, you're certainly at the sort of level of institution. But not only that, remember, you guys have a great, rich football history, and you're a place that people want to go to, and you're a big TV market. Like there's really no downsides to Miami other than you don't do quite as much graduate research, but you're in that elite academic realm. Quite honestly, I don't know why and maybe it's a Florida thing, maybe it's whatever. If I were the SEC, I would be trying my hardest to gobble you guys up, maybe even before Florida State. Florida State hasn't shown an institutional commitment to getting their program back on track. Yep, Eric, you're right. Eric, you're probably better than the good university. You're number 19 in the Power Five, so you're probably a great university. But you're right. You don't do quite enough research, but you're still in that realm.
So yeah, people here are going to make that comparison between Miami and Florida State. So we know what the football's been on the field, where both have been down, but Miami's been better the last couple of years. So from an institutional standpoint, you hit Miami tied for 19th with the University of Washington, and so they surpassed Florida State in that ranking. And then also from a media market standpoint, Tallahassee's in the 100 range compared to Miami, of course, and it's not only Miami, it's just the entire South Florida TV market.
And Florida's probably, Florida State alumni are all over the state of Florida as well. So, you're not just isolated to there. But yeah, there's no, I can't think of metrics that would mean. You guys take a look here at the ACC. When you look at the ACC, you see there's actually kind of a gap, right? Duke is sort of in a land of its own. And then there's, Notre Dame, Virginia, North Carolina are kind of a little cluster. Next little cluster would be you guys, Georgia Tech, and BC. And then there's a big gap before you start to go towards, Florida State, Pitt, Virginia Tech, Syracuse. Wake is, of course, a great school, but just isn't nearly in the realm of athletics with you guys competing in there. One thing I had, and we talked a little bit about this on the West Virginia channel. There's always talk about, could you guys add West Virginia to the ACC? And again, whether you're talking about politics or should you or could you, all the details. I think the first most important thing to look is like, would they qualify? And when we look at the data, they're in most regards, other than admissions selectivity. I mean, it's a better school than Louisville. So as long as Louisville's, and it's way, way better athletic history than Louisville. So as long as Louisville is not a mistake, then West Virginia probably wouldn't be an issue. If you were looking to grow. So that's just another piece there. But again, Carolina is kind of the gold standard of the conference. So I would say if the conference was to somehow break up, which seems unlikely given the whole grant of rights thing, you'd probably want to attach to them. But I think the other thing is people act like you can shift conferences like you move furniture between rooms in your house, and you don't, and you can't. And the other thing is, university presidents don't want to. Like, they really generally like how things are, or else they're irked at how things are and looking to get out. I mean, I think you're going to see, and we're hearing more about it now. Certainly, you saw that with the Big 12, where they all got miffed and they were all going to run around, and they actually didn't find anywhere to run around to. But they realized that we kind of like our little group, and they kept it together and patched the holes, and Bob Bowlesby, like awesome leadership, did a phenomenal job putting it back together. I think you're about to see that with the Pac-12. You're hearing a lot about, and we'll see what the Big 12 does as far as like making these people offers and everything like that. But it certainly seems, and John Wilner's got some good reporting on this today, that if the Pac-12 can survive by patching its holes, its universities would rather do that. Again, we'll see. That may change. That may change tomorrow. But you do see that schools don't like to flip around nearly as much as fans think they do.
Tony, you addressed this a couple nights ago when we discussed how difficult it is for a university to move up the ranks, that there's so much that needs to be upgraded to do that. But not to put you on the spot, because you may not be able to come up with this offhand, but have there been examples of universities that have severely upgraded their academic standing over the course of 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, USC is an example. USC went from number 55 or something in 1990 to number 23, I think, by like 2005. So, it's very hard. It takes raising billions of dollars, and it takes like brilliant leadership that is pushing hard for that. University of Texas has pushed itself up academically a lot. Alabama is sort of making some strides, because one of the hard things is you have to have like a big enough base. So actually, Boise State is an example of a school that had, just the worst of academic sort of status. I mean, great school for a lot of what they were doing, but they weren't trying to be a big global research school. And they have taken their football success and ridden that into all sorts of fundraising, rebuilding the campus, and skyrocketing their academics. But now it's skyrocketing from a layer that is not comparable to most of the Power Five. But they've doubled their research, I think, in the last 10 years or something. And so they're playing catch up, but their stuff is going up. An opposite side of that sort of would be, great school that has very, very flexible admission standards. So Arizona State, for example, and West Virginia are two schools where they are really committed to educating the population of their state. Like, if you can meet a certain requirement, you can get in, you can go to school there, and you will get a great education if you stick with it. And that's admirable. Like, that's commendable. It's noble. But it doesn't translate into the most elite academic rankings if you're going to compare against that. So there's always, whenever you look at any of these schools, there's always a deeper level to it and a deeper story to it. But it's hard to move.
With the increase in technology and just the world changing all the time, has this formula been fluid in any way? Going back 30, 40, 50, 60 years?
Not very, to be honest. It's a very like stuffy. So there is the sort of rankings that people like to use the most, the US News ranking. Then there's the Wall Street Journal one, and a couple others that are different people use. Those are only since the 80s, but they changed their formulas a little bit, but not as much. And Miami's always been pretty solid in those. I mean, you guys are great. Miami's a great school, and so Miami would be an attractive candidate for just about anybody.
Tony Altamore is here to answer your comments question concerning basically we're looking at the value of the Miami football program and the university as a whole, because that's the conversation that's being had across the nation in a number of boardrooms, and certainly the decision that's being made as college football is being twisted and turned on its head here in recent weeks. USC, UCLA to the Big Ten, countering the SEC's move from a year ago, Oklahoma, Texas, and we'll see what else transpires here in the next few weeks and months and beyond that.
To Gumby, I think this might be a year old or something. So anything you guys have won since then, it's from the NCAA. So when we did the feed in, it was from the NCAA's list. So Gumby's asking, our team titles is wrong. Again, anything you've won probably in the last year or so. I don't remember exactly when the NCAA published the list that we put the data feed to. The other data, by the way, just so you guys know, if anybody's going to stress, most of it's from MUP, which measures measuring university progress or something. So some of the financial data, for example, is deflated. So to adjust for inflation, I think it's deflated to constant 2018 dollars. So consider it as relative to each other. So if you look and you say, oh, we didn't raise 50 million, we raised 100 million. Okay, well, it's deflated. That's why. Coupe de Ville is asking, do we think that if Miami removed the SEC, they need to build their own stadium? I think they would need to build their own stadium anyway. They really probably should. I mean, Hard Rock Stadium, though, is really nice, but it's schools are typically finding that if they can, they probably should. You think the majority of SEC fan bases would have more fans at Hard Rock than Miami? And that's a good question, and that might be why they don't. UCLA loves being at the Rose Bowl. They used to be at the Coliseum. 1965, they tried to build their own stadium and it failed. And since they moved to the Rose Bowl in a huff in 1982, I think, and they love it. And it's about the same distance as your stadium, I think, drive-wise. I think you might be further distance-wise, but who knows? Chris Gons, I would say, asking, what's the best fit for Miami, SEC or Big Ten? I would think either. I mean, the Big Ten, the problem with the Big Ten is everybody wants to be in the Big Ten, and who would they take? They would probably lean towards the AAU, so you might be a better fit for the SEC. Would be my guess. Bye Bosworth is saying what grew Miami admissions was on-field success of the football team in the 80s, 90s. That's also true. What they actually, interestingly, when they find with applications and application, the number of applications plays a big role in ranking, which is really helpful in academic ranking. And I think Miami was one of these, actually, where they found that applications go up, but like quality of applications doesn't necessarily go up. So it's actually kind of a weird thing. You end up with a lot more kids getting rejected. I know USC had the same data issue there, but it boosts the image of your school and it gets your academics way up, which helps a lot. Mario Cristo Goat, I love that name. That's awesome. Is the TV money gap between SEC and versus AC as big an emergency as made out to be? That's a good question. It's probably, the 30, 40, $60 million question. The issue is, does that make a difference? John Wilner today had the best line ever. He said, Stanford could buy the Big Ten accidentally as a mistake because they're that wealthy. You guys aren't quite in that realm. 100 million versus 38. Roger Dodgers pointed out 100 million versus 38 million. That's a lot, right? Like, that is a lot. If you can get it, you should. I mean, that would be $60 million pumped into your university every year. I don't know if you guys just heard UCLA was on the verge of having to cut sports, and now they are in phenomenal, wonderful, happy world. So it solves the problems. You're getting to the point now where it used to be, yeah, the SEC and the Big Ten were ahead, and it was enough that you could probably eat it for your own happiness. Now, I would say you probably are at that point you can't really eat it, because that's the money that pays for your entire athletic department. Let me just flip way back through here and show you guys something that I think is pretty crazy. That's looking at how much of the athletic department is funded by football and baseball. Or excuse me, sorry, I misspoke. Football and basketball, obviously, not baseball. I don't think baseball makes money anywhere. And let me show you guys. It's kind of way back in here. You guys at Miami are funded by annual giving and stuff to a much larger extent than a lot of universities. And so in that regard, you're a little more insulated than some schools, but still not, fully. So this kind of takes a look at average university athletic departments within Power 5. And if you take a look at this, you see how much is coming of the revenues coming from football and men's basketball, how much is unallocated. And by the way, a lot of that unallocated is donations. So that actually is really probably tied to football. And then that little tiny sliver at the top is actually what's coming from other sports. So you take a look at the ACC, in a $114 million budget, only $20 million is coming from everything. Richard Hill, facts, winning fixes everything. Yeah, it really does. Totally right. But now take a look down. TV money is making the difference. So you hear about, you get $100 million, like that pays for everything. Now, if you take a look here, I did actually calculations on the profitability and surplus of football and men's basketball. If you look on the bottom here, guys, you'll see the green percent is how much funding comes from football and men's basketball, and the red is how much is left unfunded by the average school. And ACC, especially because you guys make way more money off basketball than anybody else, you guys are overpaying for the rest of your sports with football and men's basketball. So to add to that gives you the money that you need to really compete and succeed. Let's see if I can find. I don't know where Miami would be in some of these. So I gave you guys also, just a lot of people have asked for these. So there's a bunch of slides in here that give just a lot more data on schools. You guys are pretty financially strong. I would say in the ACC, you sort of see here, these are the bottom 15 of the A5. The only ACC school is Clemson that is really, they really rely on the money. You guys don't rely on it nearly as much. You're sort of in the middle. And sorry, I was looking at slides, not at the chat. Brian Bye was asking if Miami sues the ACC to leave the ACC, would the ACC rather get a buyout like Maryland did? Lawyers can get out of a grant of rights. It's a real good question if you can get out of the grant of rights. The smart lawyers were thinking no. The other thing is the Big 12's grant of rights is very similar to the ACC's, supposedly. And they are saying Texas and Oklahoma would be out of the grant of rights if they could get out of it. They would have sued. They would have done whatever they could if they thought they could get out of it. And they don't seem to think they can get out of it. And I guess your grant of rights, I think, is basically I think the Big 12 actually, they said, sort of copied and pasted that like whole sections of your grant of rights contract are literally verbatim copied and pasted of theirs are copied and pasted from your ACC one. So if the Big 12 can't get out of it, it's hard to think that you guys can get out of it unless they pre-negotiate. No, thank you, Palmo. Appreciate that. Hold on. What other questions have we missed? I'm sorry. When was the last time Oregon was embarrassed out of conference? Every time an Oregon family logged into Twitter. That's the answer. Just kidding. I love my Oregon fans and my Oregon friends. If 7 ACC leave, the conference will collapse. Gumby, that's exactly the case. Web security, $500 an hour to copy and paste must be nice. Welcome to the world of being an attorney. I think that's what they do. You're absolutely correct. But yeah, the money is big. You guys are also, much like USC, you guys are investing a lot in the program. And so you kind of need that money. I'll show you guys from your standpoint, you guys, the AAC, or I said the ACC, misspoke. The ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big Ten are sort of in a different world financially and institutionally from like the SEC and the Big 12 and most of the AAC. So this kind of looks, there's really three groups I found in the sport. There's, the Ivy and the UAA, which are D3 and D1 non-scholarship that have obscene amounts of money. But the next big group of the three alliance conferences, and I know the alliance is sort of at a little bit of a testy point right now, are just in another world from the rest of the sport, and especially if you exclude Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. Their other numbers are very small. Those teams rely so heavily on the football money. Take a look at this. This is annual giving. Like, what's the average donations going into schools? So, think about how much money you're getting from football. You're hearing, 40 to 100 million. How much money is coming from donations? Well, the Pac-12, and again, these are deflated 2018 numbers, so you consider them relative to each other. You're looking at 407 million. That's not year 2018. It's like adjusted for 2008 to 2018. So they're all constant. Look down there, you see the ACC, you're averaging like 200 million. When you start to, SEC, much less, Big 12, you start to get way less as you go down. Those other conferences really, really rely on the money from football, just to a much, much bigger degree. I don't know if you guys have seen this from Miami. This is kind of interesting. This sort of explains why people think, why would we have this alliance? Why do these organizations think alike? Take a look at this. This is like academic rank right to left, and all sports NCAA points on the top. So your Directors Cup standings. These numbers, the Big Ten don't yet include Helmets Hero. Yeah, I haven't recalculated them all for USC and UCLA. Although I have like where I can like easily do it, I've done it, but a lot of places it's not yet done. But you guys take a look at this. Among 77% of the Alliance Conference teams, there's only 4 combined SEC and Big 12 teams. And then among the 72% of the SEC and Big 12, there's only 5 of the Alliance teams. And it's Louisville, Nebraska, Wazoo, and Oregon. So you're looking at, Oregon's a great school. It's just, not, it's great. It's a great school, but it's more in that SEC realm, which is probably why Oregon's more interested maybe in the Big 12 than Washington or some of the others. And we saw there's really sort of 4 groups. I thought this was really interesting. I don't know if you guys have seen this ever. So you guys in the ACC with Miami, you're right there. Where are you? I'm looking for you. Oh, there you are. Yeah, you guys are right there doing great. You get right here's Miami. If you guys can see it, right by Purdue. You guys are sort of right on the edge of that Ivy League and UAA group, and then the Alliance Conference groups. So they just, you think schools do think alike. And there's a reason that all the Big Ten schools and a lot of the Pac-12 schools and the ACC schools are a lot alike. And it's because just like you think about like kids in high school being who they hang out with, that's how universities are. It's how they think and how they act and how they do things together. And success begats success. So hanging out with Michigan and Wisconsin and Northwestern helps make the Big Ten stronger. And it really, really makes a big difference. This was interesting. It sort of shows the reliance on football profits. So you guys are private institutions, so you didn't have this exact data set that you don't release it. So you're not shown on here. But you guys would be similar to the other elite schools in the conference. But you kind of see why the ACC sometimes has differences of opinion. So this is set to SEC is 100%, the SEC average, and it's how much you rely on football profits as a percentage of your overall student or university academic budget, your core academic budget. And you see the ACC is really in 2 very different groups. You got Florida State, Louisville, and Clemson, and then you've got the more elite academic ones of Georgia Tech, UNC, NC State, Virginia Tech, and UVA. And Clemson is higher than the SEC. So Clemson is very much data-wise fits perfectly in the SEC. You guys are a little more, in Miami, are on the kind of the border between an SEC school and a Big Ten school. You actually would fit perfectly in the Pac-12. It'd just be it's a really long flight to Seattle. But one of the things I think is, of course, funny of that is you guys fit with Washington in lots of ways statistically. And for those of you guys who remember history, thanks, Chris. For those of you guys who remember history, Washington and Miami are a funny, like, old school sort of like 80s, 90s rival. And in fact, the Dogfather himself, I think he went to Miami. So I love the idea if we could get more Washington, Miami. You know, one of the great things about Miami is you guys have also always been a national school. You've always really transcended where you are. And I don't know if you guys know this or not, but and Mark, if you can see the chat, do any of you guys know about the history of the airplane conference? You talk about that really quick, because it's kind of a crazy part about Miami.
Oh, yeah.
Relates to history where we are right now. So the old Pacific Coast Conference, guys, was the most dramatic, like, bunch of like bitchiness you've ever seen in your life. It was 4 schools that were like best friends: USC, UCLA, Cal, and Washington. And then there were 5 schools that hated them, who were Stanford, Oregon, Oregon State, Washington State, and Idaho. And the funny thing is they like consider themselves like academic elites, even though other than Stanford, it's debatable. And they consider the other 4 to be like way too into sports. Again, they could not stand each other, these like 2 cliques. And so the conference was busting up. Everybody knew that Stanford would be forgiven because the Big Ten really wanted Stanford to be forgiven for the Rose Bowl. So every new Stanford was going to be forgiven. Stanford actually joined the Pac-12 in 1959, 9 days before it opened. That literally was 9 days, and it was this crazy last-minute meeting at the airport. But what's funny about it is that in the middle of this was a thing called the Airplane Conference that Miami was supposed to be part of. So I don't know if you guys know, this is really funny. I think this is the 1957 LA Times, and then last week's LA Times. They literally used the same phrasing as they literally threw a coup in the conference. Although the phrase that like now that I'm hearing is the Hollywood heist, is I think what they're calling it. And so it was the California schools said, peace out, we're done with you, mic drop. And then Washington joined them about 2 months later. And Washington State was stunned. They didn't even tell Washington State. And so those of you saying, oh, well, the state of Washington's not going to let Washington leave. Yeah, they did it before. So happened before. So the 5 of them, they let Stanford in. We're looking nationally for teams to play. And there was a big proposal, and a lot of it worked out because Notre Dame really wanted it, called the Airplane Conference that Miami would have been a part of. And there were different sort of versions of the Airplane Conference. Thanks, Knox Kane. Different versions of the Airplane Conference. Miami was in some of them, but not. It was led by the guy from Pitt. He was the athletic director at Pitt, who'd been the athletic director and coach at Navy. Admiral Hamilton. And so they wanted, he had this vision of the Airplane Conference. It would be the 5, what today you can almost call the Pac-5, but they at the time called the Big 5, which would have been Stanford, Cal, Washington, UCLA, and USC. And by the way, they said to Oregon State, and Idaho, and Washington State, like, you can all go die alone in the woods. We hate you so much. And they did not admit any of them into the Pac, with the exception of Washington State. They did not admit them into the new Pac-12 until after they had fired or retired all of the athletic and university administrators that were running their schools at the time. That's how much they hated each other. But the plan was to have the 3 service academies: Notre Dame, Pitt, Penn State, Syracuse. Penn in the early stages until the Ivy League formed, and then Penn sort of bowed out. But they really wanted Penn because Penn was the big market team of Philly. That was until Michigan expanded the Big House, Penn had the biggest stadium in the country. They had the biggest crowds in the country, and they played on Notre Dame and Penn were the only ones playing every game on live TV. Penn State was like a rural ag school, but whatever. People were interested in them. They brought in a new coach from Brown, and he brought with him his protege from Brown, Joe Paterno. They did all right. But then you guys, and then also Houston, yes, on and off, were really to be a part of this. And this really coincided with the invention of the 707, where it became easy to get teams to games. It took Stanford 24 hours of train rides to get to Washington. And now it took, 2 hours on a plane or whatever. So as our friends, the Washington Huskies, and their Boeing people invented airplanes for us, the airplane conference was about to be born. And what killed it was the Pentagon actually finally said no to the service academies. So you guys always talk about like the service academies. Why don't we have the service academies? Why don't we have the service academies? The Pentagon's always been a big pain about that, and the Pentagon killed it. And so that failed. But the Pac-12 schools today's Pac-12 schools love the idea so much they actually stole the athletic director from Pitt. And he became the first executive director of the conference. They didn't call him a commissioner because they were still so mad from their drama of the old conference that he was never allowed to be called commissioner. He was the executive director. And they called it an association, not a conference, because they were still so mad at what Oregon and Oregon State had done. So you guys were a part of that airplane conference. And there's an amazing book. Matt Brown wrote a book called What If that is really cool. And it looks at what if the airplane conference had succeeded. And he was saying he believes that if the airplane conference had succeeded, that it would have actually, because the Big Ten was being ornery, the Rose Bowl would have become the championship game of the airplane conference. And that the airplane conference would have maybe been the first national conference going back to the 50s. So it's kind of a crazy thing. And Miami would have been a part of that. So go Canes.
Fascinating stuff. Tony Altimore joining us, as he has a number of times on all the channels. So we're going to get Tony back here as much as we possibly can. But please follow him on Twitter. And so many people have been asking about these metrics and the decks as a whole, and they are accessible on Tony's Twitter feed. There you see it at TJ Altimore, and Tony's done an outstanding job bringing this.
My apologies, guys. We've cobbled these together really quick, so they're not perfect. There's some typos. I'm sorry, but we wanted to get them out so that fans could look at them and fans could sort of see. Fans could look at things the way the presidents are looking at things.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's very interesting for education, for just to size up what, again, the power brokers, the decision makers are looking at in making these determinations.
And I guess sort of one other thing, somebody's asking about going independent. I would think not. Going independent is a nightmare. And to go independent, like, you'd have to be able to get the money. The other thing is, when you go independent, guys, remember, you only get the money for your home games. So you're only selling half of your games. Whereas when you are in a conference, you're getting money for every game. So I don't think it makes sense to go independent. I mean, and the other thing is, you guys are in a great conference. When you think about going independent, you lose that association with those other schools. Like, the more you can have that association hanging out, mixing around with North Carolina and Virginia and Duke, like, that is as great as you can have. When you guys are, in the ACC basketball tournament, and you're playing Duke and you're playing Carolina, like, it's your prospective students, your prospective faculty, and your donors. Like, they're seeing you guys being affiliated with those schools. You're in rarefied air as a member of the ACC. And so I think that it wouldn't make sense to ditch that and go independent, where it's just a pain in the butt. You guys are, I think you're too good to be independent anymore. Somebody else saying his contract really sucks. I wonder if it's intentional. It's such a legal mess to break it. My guess is there's a lot of really smart lawyers who did it. And sometimes when really smart lawyers make things that are a big mess, they make it intentionally so to do that. And that, sort of, you guys are right now sort of, I think a lot of Miami fans are really itching to, like, break it, like they want to get out. But at the same time, let me tell you, your friends and your sort of rival friends at Washington would say you don't want to be in the group left behind somehow. And quite honestly, you're probably stronger where you are, especially right now. Miami's in a bit of a rebuilding phase. Just thinking strategically, not this is just my personal advice, not as much data backed, but like, you want to be in a place, you want to knock people around, win your games. If Miami's kicking people's butts, you will never be left out of anything.
Yeah, it seems to be a much different place and different conversation for a Miami or for a Clemson, but certainly Miami from a more well-rounded standpoint, looking at all the factors, than it is for Wake Forest, than it is for Kansas State. For, my advice to the Big 12 is just grab as many reputable institutions and sports programs as you can, because you're not going to catch the Big Ten and the SEC from a quality standpoint. So why not just hoard up the Arizona and Arizona States of the world and fortify your conference that way?
Well, I'll tell you guys something actually Andy Staples said about an hour ago to the Sigum guy. I love the Sigum guys. They and Mark are like about as great as you can get. Andy Staples said, I thought the smartest advice I've heard on this whole thing yet. He thinks that the Big 12 or the ACC, you guys could do it. They take it actually probably from you before they took it from the Big 12. Should say to Washington and Oregon, you know what? We'll take you. You don't have to sign anything. Come join us. Get out of your mess. Come to us. If the Big 10 calls you, you can go and get them in, and then deal with it later. I thought it was the smartest thing I've heard in this whole mess. So yeah, if you guys haven't seen that, watch all of Mark's videos, and then when you're completely done with Mark's videos, go watch Andy Staples and Sikkim.
Yeah, we had Andy on a couple weeks ago. He's phenomenal. Absolutely. Good stuff there. Tony, we thank you so much for giving of your time and your expertise. This is phenomenal.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone. You know that we're here for Miami Football Talk every Wednesday at 7, Thursday at 8 Eastern. So we'll be back here in 24 hours talking Miami football with you once again. And again, Tony Altimore, let me get the banner up there one more time. He's flashing the U, and you know you're going to get so many people on your side, Tony, by just doing that.
Hey, I remember, like I said, you guys made me a cool 13-year-old with the coolest hat you could have at age 13 as a kid.
Yeah, Michigan. Let's give another look to that.
There we go.
That is phenomenal.
With my high school jersey.
That is tremendous. With, of course, one of the legends, Dennis Erickson. Tremendous.
By the way, Rowan Marley was about 5'4", and he could knock a mountain on its butt. It was awesome to watch. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you so much, Tony. Everybody else, we'll see you actually in a few minutes. We got a call-in show over on the main channel, so we'll see you soon.